My younger son, a pilot, called me. Mom, something strange is happening. My sister-in-law is at the house. Yes, she is, I replied. She's in the shower. His voice dropped to a whisper. That's impossible. I have her passport in my hands. She just boarded my flight to France. At that very moment, I heard footsteps behind me. I'm glad you're home. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. This morning, just like any other, I was rushing to do the dishes after breakfast. My older son, Stephen, had left for work early, leaving the house quiet. His son, my grandson Matthew, that clever little rascal of 7, had already been picked up by the school bus. And Aracely, my daughter-in-law, Stephen's wife, had just gone upstairs. Her soft voice floated down to me. Mom, I'm going to take a quick shower. Okay, I nodded, smiling. I had barely put away the last plate when the landline rang. I dried my hands on my apron and hurried to answer. The cheerful, youthful voice of my younger son, Ivan, filled the line. Mom, I just wanted to say hi. I had some free time during a layover at the airport. Hearing his voice felt like a warm hug. Ivan is my pride and joy, a young co-pilot who's always on the move, living out the childhood dream he had of conquering the skis. I closed the door and whispered into the phone, trying not to let my nervousness show. Ivan, I just heard Aracely. She's here. She just finished showering. Are you sure you didn't make a mistake? On the other side, Ivan fell silent again, and then his voice became harsher. Mom, it's impossible. I have her right in front of me on this plane. I'm looking at her right now. I was speechless, my mind blank. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so much that I almost dropped the receiver. The living room suddenly felt suffocating, even though the sun was shining brightly outside. I collapsed onto the couch trying to take a deep breath, but my chest felt heavy with an unanswered question. If Aracely was here, who was the woman on Ivan's flight? And if the woman on the flight was Aracely, who was the person in my house? A few minutes later, Aracely came down to the kitchen. She was wearing a clean, light blue dress, her hair still damp, and she smiled with the same sweetness as always. Mom, I'm going to the market early today. Do you want me to get you any vegetables or anything? Her voice was kind, familiar, as if nothing strange was happening. I looked at her, trying to force a smile, but inside I felt as if I was carrying stones. Yes, honey, bring some tomatoes, please, I replied, my throat dry. Aracely nodded. She took her wicker basket and walked out of the house. Her silhouette disappeared behind the gate. I stood there watching her go with a whirlwind in my soul. I didn't believe Ivan was lying to me. My son had no reason to invent a story like this. He had always been an honest boy, very sensitive and affectionate with his family. But Aracely, the daughter-in-law I had lived with for so many years, was also in front of me in the flesh. Unmistakable. I asked myself, could there be something I've missed? Is there some secret in this house that I, an old woman, have never noticed? I sat in silence in the living room as the midday sun filtered through the curtains, casting faint stripes of light on the tiled floor. The old armchair where I always sit to knit or read stories to Matthew also seemed heavier now. Ivan's call kept echoing in my head. Every one of his words was like a hammer blow to my heart. I looked around the room where the family photos hung. Stephen and Aracely on their wedding day, newborn Matthew, and Ivan's radiant smile when he first put on his pilot's uniform. All those memories now seemed covered by a haze, blurry and full of doubt. My name is Stella Brooks, a 65-year-old widow who lives in a quiet middle-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. My husband, Raphael, passed away 10 years ago, leaving me with the 2 sons I love more than my own life. Stephen, the oldest, is a hardworking architect, always immersed in his blueprints and projects. Ivan, the youngest, is my pride for having made his dream of being a pilot come true. My life revolves around Stephen's small family, my daughter-in-law, Arisley, and my grandson, Matthew, and the peaceful days in this house. Arisley, my daughter-in-law, was always the perfect model in my eyes. She was beautiful, industrious, always impeccable, from the way she dressed to how she cared for Matthew. I still remember the day of their wedding, a big party held in the yard of her parents' house. Even though Arisley's family wasn't wealthy, they put in their utmost effort to make everything perfect. Arisley came into my house with a confident smile and a bright look, as if she had been born to be a wonderful wife and mother. I used to think how lucky I was to have a daughter-in-law like her. After Arisley left for the market, I stayed seated, unconsciously gripping the edge of the tablecloth. Ivan's call made me re-examine small details that had seemed normal before. There were days when Arisley would leave the house saying she was going to the market or to see a friend, but when she returned, she seemed like a different person. One day she was all sweetness, hugging Matthew and singing to him to put him to sleep. But on other days, she was in a bad mood and would yell at me just because I forgot to put the salt shaker back in its place. I used to think they were just the mood swings of a young woman, but now I wasn't so sure. My heart was tied in a knot as if someone was messing with all the memories I had cherished for so long. I remember once a few months ago, Arisley took a pen to write the grocery list with her right hand. Her handwriting was very straight and neat, but the next day I saw her using her left hand and she was writing with more scrolls as if she wasn't used to it. I asked her, "Since when do you write with your other hand, honey?" She laughed and quickly replied, "Oh, just for fun, Mom, I'm practicing." I nodded without giving it more thought, but now that detail had become a sharp piece in my mind. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard the door open. Matthew ran in, his backpack bouncing on his back. He hugged me tightly, saying in his little chirping voice, "Grandma, the teacher complimented me today because I drew so well." I stroked his head, trying to smile, but I still felt a weight in my chest. Matthew sat down and pulled out his notebook to show me. "Grandma, look, yesterday my mom helped me with my homework with her right hand and her writing was so pretty. But today she wrote with her left and it came out uglier." The boy pointed to 2 pages in the notebook, one with well-formed letters and the other with crooked ones. I looked at the handwriting and my heart sank. "Your mom must have been busy today. She was probably tired. That's why she wrote like that," I said, trying to hide my confusion. But Matthew looked up with his innocent eyes. "Grandma, my mom is so weird. Some days she hugs me really, really tight, but other days she doesn't even look at me." My grandson's words were another stab. I hugged him, trying to comfort him, but in my head, everything was starting to get tangled up. Just then the doorbell rang. I got up, opened the door, and saw Mrs. Collins, my good neighbor, standing there with the plate that Arisley had taken to her the day before. She smiled with her usual kind smile, but there was curiosity in her eyes. "Stella, your daughter-in-law is so nice, but yesterday I noticed she gave me the plate with her left hand and you told me she's a righty, right? That's strange. Or maybe she uses both hands." I forced a smile and replied, "Maybe so, Helen." "Do you want to come in for some tea?" She nodded and came in, but her comment was like a thorn stuck in me. It wasn't just me. Even the neighbors had noticed the difference. I served her tea and we talked about this and that, but as soon as she left, I sank onto the couch with my hand on my chest. I felt frozen, as if the world was falling down on me. That afternoon, I went out into the garden with the watering can, trying to let the water fall gently on the daisies I had cared for years. The sun was starting to set. The shadows of the trees stretched across the yard, but my soul could not find peace. The words of Matthew, of Mrs. Collins, and Ivan's firm voice on the phone kept circling in my head like pebbles thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples that wouldn't stop. I was watering the plants, but my mind wasn't there. I asked myself, am I too old now to notice the strange things happening in my own house, or have I been turning a blind eye on purpose, wanting to believe in the happy family I always dreamed of? Aracely returned from the market carrying her wicker basket, but what caught my attention was that she was holding it with her left hand. I remembered perfectly that Aracely always used her right hand, from how she held the knife to chop vegetables to how she combed Matthew's hair. I stood there watching her put the basket on the kitchen table, and I asked her in a low voice, "What did you buy, Aracely?" My voice tried to sound natural, but inside a wave of suspicion was growing. She smiled and replied very politely, "I got some tomatoes, cilantro, and fresh fish." "Mom, I'm going to make the roasted fish you like so much tonight. Does that sound good?" Her voice was soft as always, but I couldn't help but notice her hands. "The left one? No, the right one." I nodded and turned away, pretending to clean the table, but my heart was pounding hard. Was I imagining things, or were these small details trying to tell me something? At dinner time, the whole family gathered at the table. Stephen was tired after a long day at work, but he still smiled at Matthew and asked him how school had been. Aracely ate slowly, delicately, and even turned to Stephen to remind him, "Honey, the parent-teacher conference is next week, so be sure to take the day off." I looked at her, trying to find the daughter-in-law I was so proud of, but in my head, Ivan's voice kept echoing. "She's sitting in first class next to a man." I bit my lip, trying to swallow the anguish, but it felt like a stone stuck in my throat. Just 3 days later, everything was different. Matthew dropped a glass of water during dinner, and the water splashed all over the tablecloth. I quickly grabbed a rag to clean it, laughing, "It's okay, honey, just be more careful." But Aracely, sitting across from him, suddenly frowned and said in a sharp voice, "Matthew, why are you so clumsy? Be more careful." I was stunned, looking at Stephen. He also frowned and said in a low voice, "Aracely, it was an accident, that's all." She turned with a spark of anger in her eyes. "You always defend him, and I end up looking like the bad guy in the house." The atmosphere at the table became heavy. Matthew lowered his head, his eyes full of tears. I hugged him, feeling a deep pain. Only a few days ago, Aracely had lovingly reminded him about school, and now she seemed like a completely different person. I sat next to her, watching in silence, trying to put the pieces together in my head. Today she was irritable. The other day she was so sweet. Today she used her left hand. The other day her right. These small differences, one by one, were piling up in my mind like the pieces of a puzzle I still couldn't see completely. I told myself I had to calm down, but every time I looked at Aracely, I saw a stranger, as if she wasn't the daughter-in-law I had lived with for so many years. A few days later, I took Matthew to school. He held my hand as we walked down the same old cobblestone street. Suddenly, he stopped, looked at me, and said in a sad voice, "Grandma, yesterday my mom taught me how to write, and she was so patient. Her handwriting was so pretty, but today she didn't even want to look at my homework. She told me to do it by myself." I knelt down to look into his clear eyes, and I felt my heart break. "Your mom was busy, honey." "Don't be sad," I said, but my voice trembled. Matthew nodded, but his gaze was still full of disappointment. I hugged him, feeling a huge sense of powerlessness. He's only 7. How was he supposed to understand something that I myself couldn't figure out? That night, we sat down to dinner again. Suddenly, Aracely took a small notebook out of her bag and started writing something with her left hand. Stephen, who was serving himself food, laughed suddenly. Hey, since when do you write with your left hand? It looks so strange. Aracely stopped dead with a forced smile on her lips. Oh, just experimenting, honey. She quickly put the notebook away in her bag, but I noticed a flash of panic in her eyes. Stephen shook his head and didn't say anything else, but I knew he had also noticed something strange. I stayed seated there, gripping my spoon, trying to keep a straight face, but inside the doubts were growing like a slow fire. One morning, I took an empty spice jar and crossed the same old cobblestone street to go to Mrs. Collins' house. Aracely had borrowed it a few weeks ago, saying it was for making the chili she liked so much. I knocked on the door and Mrs. Collins opened it with her usual kind smile. "Stella, come in. Let me make you some coffee," she said, a rag still in her hand. I gave her the jar, thinking of thanking her and leaving, but she pulled me to sit in a wooden chair in her kitchen. The atmosphere was warm. It smelled of roasted coffee, but I couldn't relax. Mrs. Collins looked at me with eyes full of doubt and lowered her voice. "Stella, please don't get mad at what I'm about to say. Has your daughter-in-law's personality changed? One day she greets me so happily and even asks about my kids, but yesterday she passed by here. I waved at her and she didn't even acknowledge me as if she didn't know me." Mrs. Collins's words were another stone in the troubled lake of my heart. I forced a smile and replied, "She must have been in a hurry, Helen. You know how young people are these days." But inside, I was a mess. I knew Mrs. Collins wasn't just talking to talk. She's a very sensitive person who always pays attention to details. If even she noticed how strange Aracely was, then my suspicions weren't just my imagination anymore. I stayed for a little while longer, took a sip of the now cold coffee, and said goodbye, my heart heavy. On my way back, I passed by Mr. Johnson's bakery, where I always bought sweet bread for Matthew. Mr. Johnson was at the counter, and when he saw me, he smiled. "Mrs. Brooks, what can I get for the little champ today?" I asked for some pastries, and he suddenly asked, "You're Stephen's mom, right? His wife came in the other day. So nice. She even told me how delicious my bread was. But this morning, she came back with a scowl on her face. She bought the bread and didn't even say thank you. She just left." I froze, gripping the handle of my purse. "She must have been tired, Joe," I replied, my voice trembling. I thanked him quickly and left. Mr. Johnson's words were another knife cutting deeper into the doubts that were growing inside me. When I got home, I made myself some tea and sat on the porch. The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of the daisies from the garden. I looked toward the street that led to the market where Aracely always walked. Suddenly, I saw her returning, carrying her shopping bag, but she greeted me in a dry voice, "Good afternoon, Mom." No smile, no happiness like yesterday when she bragged about getting a good deal on the cilantro. I nodded and replied in a low voice, "You're back already." But inside, I couldn't help but observe her more closely. The blouse she was wearing today was navy blue, different from the white blouse she had on when she left. I tried to ask her in a soft voice, "Why did you change your blouse?" Aracely paused for a second and then quickly replied, "Oh, I got a stain on it and had to change." She smiled halfway and hurried into the kitchen. I stayed there with the teacup in my hands, feeling as if a rock was crushing my chest. The words of Mrs. Collins, of Mr. Johnson, and the way Aracely replied to me, everything forced me to stop ignoring things. That night we were all having dinner. Matthew was talking about school with his cheerful little voice, but I noticed that Aracely only nodded without answering him, unlike other times. When Stephen asked, "Are you done eating so your mom can clear the plates?" Matthew suddenly turned to me and said innocently, "Grandma, oh, my mom didn't sing to me to sleep. But yesterday she did sing that song, Cielito Lindo, you always sing to me, and it sounded so beautiful." I looked at Arisley, who was serving herself food without reacting, but Matthew's words were like a needle in my heart. That lullaby, that Cielito Lindo that I used to sing to Stephen and Ivan, only Arisley and I knew it in this house. So why did she sing it yesterday and not today? Why did she change so quickly? I got up to clear the plates, but my mind was no longer there. I remembered the times Arisley would leave the house saying she was going to see a friend, but would return with a strange look. One day she brought a bouquet of fresh flowers, saying a friend had given them to her. But another day she got angry when I asked her, "Where did you go today that you got home so late?" I used to think these were unimportant things, but now they seemed like the pieces of a much bigger secret. I didn't want to believe that Arisley was hiding something from me, but every word, every gesture of hers made me doubt. That night after cleaning the kitchen, I sat at the dining room table and took an old notebook out of a drawer. My hand was shaking as I wrote the first line. 3:00 p.m. Arisley leaves for the market, returns 6:00 p.m. wearing a blue blouse. Irritable attitude. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that nothing was happening. I kept writing. Yesterday, she sang to Matthew to sleep tender. Today, she was cold, didn't sing. Each word was a heavy stroke, as if I was engraving my suspicions into reality. My old notebook was now full of notes about Arisley. Every line was a piece of my doubt, as if I was painting a picture I didn't dare to look at. I sat in the kitchen, looking at the notebook with a heavy heart. I couldn't keep all these thoughts to myself anymore. They were like waves rising and falling, leaving me alone in my confusion. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand me, who wouldn't judge me, who wouldn't jump to conclusions. I immediately thought of Carol, my best friend, who has been with me since we were young, when we used to sit and knit under a tree and tell each other our lives. I picked up the phone, my voice trembling. "Carol, are you free this afternoon? Let's go to the coffee shop on the corner. I need to talk." Carol accepted instantly, her voice as warm as ever. "Stella, I knew something was wrong. Wait for me, I'm on my way." I felt a little relief, but the worry was still weighing me down. I put on my old shawl and left the house for the small coffee shop on the corner where Carol and I had shared so many joys and sorrows. The place was the same, with its dark wooden tables and that delicious smell of freshly roasted coffee. I chose a table in a corner where the light was dim so no one would hear our conversation. I sat there hugging the hot coffee cup, but with my soul cold. I wondered how I was going to tell her about all these suspicions. How was I going to dare to admit that I was doubting my own daughter-in-law? Carol arrived wearing a light sweater and carrying a bag of fresh vegetables. She sat down and looked me straight in the eyes with that sharp but affectionate gaze. "Stella, just looking at your face, I know something big is wrong. Come on, let it out. What's got you so worried?" I took a deep breath, trying not to let my voice break, but every word got stuck in my throat. I told her everything in a summary. Ivan's call from the airport, Arisley's passport, the woman identical to her on the plane, and all the small details I had written down, from how she changed hands to write to her mood changing from day to night. I took the notebook out of my bag and handed it to her. "Look, I wrote it all down here. I don't know if I'm imagining it, but I can't be a fool anymore." Carol flipped through the pages with a frown. She read my shaky handwriting slowly. "You've noticed everything, Stella," she said in a serious voice. "Every time she leaves and comes back, it's like she's another person. What do you think it is?" I shook my head, gripping the coffee cup. "I don't know, Carol. I just know I'm scared. Scared that Arisley is hiding something. Scared that my family will break apart if I dig any deeper. But I can't stop. I have to know the truth. For Stephen, for Matthew." Carol put her cup on the table and looked at me with determination. You can't fool a woman easily, Stella. What does your gut tell you? I'm sure there's something shady going on here. You have to get to the bottom of this. I hesitated and my voice became a whisper. But what if I'm misjudging her? What if I hurt Stephen? Carol interrupted me firmly. Trust your gut. If you don't find out the truth, you'll always live with the doubt and you won't be able to protect Matthew or Stephen. Just then, Mrs. Jenkins, the lady who sells vegetables at the market and whom I know, came into the coffee shop. She recognized me and smiled. Mrs. Brooks, what a coincidence. Last week, I saw your daughter-in-law at the market. She was so kind. She even bought an extra bunch of cilantro to cook with. But this morning, she came by again looking so serious. She didn't even say hello. She bought her vegetables and left. I smiled and asked him a few questions about his flight, about how he was doing. He laughed heartily and said everything was great, that work was going smoothly. But suddenly his tone changed as if he was hesitant to say something. Hey Mom, something really weird happened. My sister-in-law is at the house. I was puzzled. I looked toward the stairs where I could still hear the water running in the bathroom. Of course she is, honey. Aracely is upstairs taking a shower, I replied, completely certain. Aracely had talked to me less than 10 minutes ago, and she was wearing that white blouse she always wore around the house. How could I be wrong? But on the other end of the line, Ivan was silent for a long while. So long that I could hear his breathing. Then his voice became very serious, full of amazement. Mom, that's impossible because I have her passport right here in my hand. She just got on my flight headed for France. I laughed, thinking he must have been mistaken. Oh, honey, you must have seen wrong. I just saw Aracely. She even told me she was going to take a shower. I tried to explain calmly to reassure him, but he didn't laugh. He didn't answer me like he always did. He told me in a slow voice, as if he was trying to put the story in order in his head, that after all the passengers had boarded, he ran out to look for some papers he'd forgotten and accidentally found a passport lying near the boarding gate. At first, he thought about giving it to the airport staff, but when he opened it to see who it belonged to, he froze. The photo was of Aracely. Her name was right there, clear as day. There was no way to get it wrong. My heart began to beat faster, but I tried to stay calm. Are you sure, Ivan? That passport could be someone else's, I said, even though a tiny thorn of uneasiness had already pricked me. Ivan sighed, and his voice was now a mix of bewilderment and firmness. Mom, I just went down to the passenger cabin to check if it was her. She's sitting in first class next to a man who looks very rich and elegant. They were talking very close, like they were a couple. Ivan's words were like a stab. I stood frozen, gripping the phone receiver. My head was spinning. A couple, impossible. I had just heard Aracely's voice from upstairs. I had just seen her in the flesh in this very house. But right at that moment, the sound of the water in the bathroom stopped. I heard the bedroom door open and Aracely's voice came down the stairs. It was soft but loud enough to make me jump. Mom, who is it? I panicked. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it was going to burst out of my chest. Just a friend of mine, I replied quickly, my voice trembling, and I hurried into the living room to avoid Aracely's gaze as she peeked her head out from the stairs, her hair still soaked. Something wrong with your daughter-in-law, I forced a smile and replied. She must be tired, Marie. But inside, I felt like I was drowning. Another person who noticed how strange Aracely was. I thanked Mrs. Jenkins, watched her leave, and turned back to Carol. Panic reflected in my eyes. Carol took my hand and her voice softened. See, Stella, it's not just you. Even the neighbors notice. Don't lie to yourself anymore. Keep writing everything down, and if you have to, you're going to have to follow her. Not to hurt her, but to protect your family. I nodded, but my heart sank. I knew Carol was right, but the idea of following my own daughter-in-law made me feel as if I was betraying my family. I had spent my whole life taking care of this home, and now I had to do something I never imagined: investigate one of my own. That afternoon, I returned home, my head still a mess. Aracely left the house carrying her familiar red basket. "Mom, I'm going to the market for a bit," she said in a soft voice. I nodded, but as soon as she disappeared behind the gate, I opened my notebook and wrote 3:00 p.m. Aracely leaves for the market carrying a red basket. Normal attitude. I stayed there watching the clock, counting every minute. At 6, Aracely returned, but the basket she was holding in her hand was now blue. I was surprised and asked her, "Did you switch baskets?" She smiled and quickly replied, "Yes, the other one broke and a friend lent me this one." I nodded, but my hands were shaking as I added to the notebook. Returned 6 p.m. carrying a blue basket, voice a little rushed. My notes were piling up. Each line was one step closer to the truth, but also one step away from the image of the old mother who only knows how to love and trust. On the weekend, Stephen left for overtime work early, and Matthew was at a school activity, leaving the house quiet just for Aracely and me. I was cleaning the dining room table, trying to keep myself busy to ward off the doubts that were eating at me. But then Aracely came down from her room in a pale yellow floral dress, looking as fresh as she did in her first days of marriage. "Mom, I'm going to the market for a bit," she said in a soft voice. She took her usual wicker basket and left. I nodded, smiling, but inside a voice insisted, "Follow her, Stella, go find the truth." I didn't think twice. I took my old shawl, put it over my head to cover my face a little, and left the house in silence, keeping a safe distance behind Aracely. The sun was hot, sweat was soaking my back, but I didn't care. I just wanted to know where she was really going, what she was doing. Aracely walked quickly down the cobblestone street that led to the market. But suddenly, instead of turning right as always, she turned left into an alley behind a working-class neighborhood. The houses were old, crammed against each other with peeling paint and rusty tin roofs. I slowed down, my heart pounding, trying to hide behind some bicycles parked on the sidewalk. Aracely didn't look back. She kept walking. She went into an even narrower alley where the sunlight barely reached. I hid behind a mechanic's shop where a man was concentrating on tightening nuts. I saw Aracely stop in front of an old wooden door, knock softly, and then go in and disappear. I stood there, my breathing ragged, my head spinning. What was my daughter-in-law doing there? This wasn't the market or any of the friends' houses she had mentioned. I wanted to walk over, knock on the door, and ask her directly, but my feet seemed to be nailed to the ground. I was afraid of the truth, afraid that what I was about to discover would break everything. In the end, I turned around and went back home, full of questions, each step heavier than the last. I had barely pushed the gate open when I froze. Aracely was standing in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a white blouse on, completely different from the floral dress she had left in. She was frowning and looked at me with cold, sharp eyes. "Where did you go, Mom, that you're just getting back?" I stood frozen, my mouth dry, unable to say a word. Only a few minutes ago, I had seen her go into that alley in a yellow dress. How could she have gotten back so quickly? And this blouse, I stammered. "I just went for a walk, that's all." Aracely nodded without saying anything else, but her gaze sent a shiver down my spine. I went up to my room pretending to look for something, but in reality it was to escape that look, to calm my heart that was pounding wildly in my chest. That night I was sitting knitting when Matthew ran into my room, his cheeks red from playing in the yard. He hugged my legs, sobbing. "Grandma, my mom yelled at me just because I dropped a pencil, not like yesterday. Yesterday she was so nice she even hugged me." I took Matthew in my arms, stroked his head, but inside I felt like I was burning. Your mom was tired, honey. Don't be sad, I said, but my voice trembled. Matthew hid his face in my shoulder and whispered, Grandma, I want the mom from yesterday. I hugged him tighter, tears about to fall. My grandson's words were like a knife, engraving my suspicions even deeper. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The images repeated over and over in my head. Aracely in the floral dress going into the alley. Aracely in the white blouse standing in the kitchen. And Ivan's voice, she's on my flight. I took the notebook out of the drawer and wrote a sentence. I didn't even dare to believe myself. Maybe they are not the same person. That sentence felt like a curse and made me tremble. The next morning, I decided to go back to that alley. I couldn't bear the doubt anymore. I took the family photo that hangs in the living room, the one where Aracely smiles radiantly next to Stephen and Matthew. I held it tight and left the house, determined but terrified. The alley was the same as yesterday, silent and somber. I stopped next to a corn stand where a middle-aged woman was fanning the charcoal. I showed her the photo and asked, "Excuse me, have you seen this young woman around here?" The woman looked at it closely and then pointed. "Oh, yes, of course. She comes and goes often from the house at number 14, that one over there." I thanked her.